Go ahead and get comfortable. Wherever you are right now, settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow down a little. We are going to spend a long time together tonight, moving through the world of Family Guy, piece by piece, character by character, moment by moment, and there is absolutely no rush. This is the kind of video you put on when you want to feel like someone is quietly narrating the inside of your brain. So close your eyes if you want, or stare at the ceiling. Either works. We are going in. Part 1. Where it all came from, the origin story. Before there was a Griffin family. Before there was a talking dog sipping a martini or a baby building weapons in his bedroom. Before any of that existed, there was a young man from Kent, Connecticut, sitting in an art school dorm room in Providence, Rhode Island, drawing cartoons. Seth MacFarlane was born on the 26th of October, 1973, and almost from the moment he could hold a pencil, that was the direction his life was heading. By the time he was 8 years old, he was already publishing a comic strip in his local newspaper. Not doodling it in a notebook and showing his parents, actually publishing it in a newspaper at 8. The strip was called Walter Crouton, and it ran in the Kent Good Times Dispatch while most kids his age were worried about multiplication tables and kickball. He grew up watching the Flintstones, Looney Tunes, and all the classic animation that Hanna-Barbera built its reputation on. But the show that changed everything for him was The Simpsons. He saw the first episode at 14 years old, and something clicked. He decided that was what he wanted to do. That was the world he wanted to live in, not just watchmake. He went to the Rhode Island School of Design, a place known locally as RISD, which gets pronounced like RISD. It is one of the most respected art institutions in the country, and MacFarlane enrolled to study animation. While he was there, he worked on stand-up comedy on the side, he appeared in student films, and in his senior year, he made his thesis film. He called it The Life of Larry. The Life of Larry was a short animated film only a few minutes long, about a pudgy, dim-witted, middle-aged man named Larry Cummings who lived with his patient wife, also named Lois, and his overweight teenage son Milt. Larry had a talking dog named Steve. If you watch it today, which you can actually find online, the DNA of what would become Family Guy is just sitting right there on the surface. Larry would become Peter. Steve would become Brian. The wife's name was already Lois. The son's build would eventually show up in Chris. You can trace the whole thing like a family tree. MacFarlane's professor at RISD submitted the film to Hanna-Barbera, the legendary animation studio that created Yogi Bear, the Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, and basically invented Saturday morning cartoons as an institution. Hanna-Barbera hired him right out of graduation in 1995, and he moved to Los Angeles to work as an animator and writer on shows like Dexter's Laboratory, Cow and Chicken, and Johnny Bravo. He spent the most time on Johnny Bravo, and working on that show allowed him to develop his own comedic sensibility in a way the other shows did not. The script-writing process on Johnny Bravo was more open, and MacFarlane used it to sharpen his instincts for character-based humor, physical comedy, and the kind of deadpan absurdism he would later build his career on. In 1996, while still working at Hanna-Barbera, he created a follow-up to The Life of Larry called Larry and Steve. This one aired as part of Cartoon Network's World Premiere Toons Showcase in 1997. It featured the same Larry character but leaned harder into the talking dog, Steve, whose intelligence and dry wit gave the short most of its personality. Executives at Fox saw both shorts. They liked what they saw enough to sign MacFarlane to a development deal worth around $2.5 million a year to create a new animated series based on those characters. Fox gave him a $50,000 budget and asked him to produce a 15-minute pilot. MacFarlane completed it and pitched the full demo to Fox on the 15th of May, 1998. The pitch was approved. The green light was given. And what would become one of the longest-running animated shows in television history was officially in motion. The show premiered on the 31st of January, 1999, right after Super Bowl 33. That is one of the single best time slots in all of television. Every year, the network that airs the Super Bowl gets to place a show directly behind it, knowing that tens of millions of people are already sitting on their couches. They just have to not change the channel. Family Guy's premiere pulled in around 22 million viewers, which is a staggering number. MacFarlane was 25 years old when the show debuted. He was one of the youngest creators to ever launch a network animated series. and he was writing, producing, voicing, and overseeing nearly every aspect of it himself. The voice of Peter Griffin came from a security guard he once overheard talking while he was still at RISD. Something about the man's particular accent and cadence stuck in his memory, and years later, that became the voice of a fictional Rhode Island dad. Brian's voice is just McFarlane speaking in his own natural register, and Stewie came from Rex Harrison. Specifically, McFarlane was a fan of Rex Harrison's performance in the 1964 film My Fair Lady, where Harrison played the imperious, fastidious Professor Henry Higgins. McFarlane said in interviews that he had been working up an impression of Harrison in college, and one day he had the idea to take that voice and put it into the body of a 1-year-old baby. He described it as Rex Harrison in an infant's body, and by his own telling, once that idea clicked into place, the character of Stewie essentially wrote himself. The show was set in Quahog, Rhode Island, a fictional town whose streets and geography would grow increasingly elaborate over the show's run. The Griffin family lived at 31 Spooner Street. They had neighbors to the right and left. They had a bar called the Drunken Clam, where Peter and his friends gathered. They had Meg's high school, Peter's brewery job, Stewie's bedroom full of weapons, and Brian's car parked in the driveway. A whole small world built inside a half-hour animated frame. The first season had 13 episodes and averaged around 12.8 million households tuning in each week, enough to rank it 33rd in the national Nielsen ratings for the year. For a brand new animated comedy on a Sunday night, those were solid, respectable numbers. Then Fox started moving it around. They put it against Frasier on NBC on Thursday nights. The ratings dropped. They moved it to Tuesday nights against Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which was at the peak of its cultural domination at the time. The ratings dropped more. Fox kept shuffling the show from time slot to time slot with little notice and even less patience, and the audience had trouble finding it week to week. By 2002, after 3 seasons, Fox canceled Family Guy. And then, something nobody expected happened. Drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to know if someone in Australia is falling asleep to this right now, or if it's 3 a.m. somewhere in Canada. Let me know. And if you are not subscribed yet, hit the button. It is free, it helps more than you think, and this is the kind of content that gets better the bigger the community gets. Cartoon Network bought the rights to air reruns of Family Guy on their Adult Swim block. They got those rights cheaply because nobody thought there was much value left in a canceled cartoon. The rerun started on the 20th of April 2003, and almost immediately, something strange happened. The show started pulling massive numbers. It became the highest-rated show on the entire Adult Swim block, boosting the block's overall viewership by around 239%. People who had never seen it the first time around were discovering it through late-night reruns. People who had watched it before were watching it again, introducing it to friends, recording it on VHS cassettes, burning it to DVD-R discs, passing it around. At the same time, the DVD sets for the first 2 seasons came out and sold over 400,000 copies, which was extraordinary for a canceled show. The combination of Adult Swim ratings and DVD sales numbers caught Fox's attention. The network that had canceled Family Guy twice started reconsidering. In 2004, they ordered new episodes. A 4th season was commissioned. The show that was dead was coming back. That resurrection, that complete reversal of fortune, made Family Guy genuinely unique in the history of television. A show had never been brought back from the dead quite like that. The Cartoon Network reruns had done what no advertising campaign could have done. They had given the show to a new generation of fans and reminded an older generation of why they had loved it in the first place. What matters for the purposes of what we are going to talk about tonight is that the show got that chance. It got a second life. And the world it came back to, the characters, the setting, the mythology built across those first 3 seasons, that is what we are going to live inside for the rest of this video. Part 2. Peter Griffin, the man, the myth, the working-class legend. Peter Malone Griffin, father, husband, brewery worker, and one of the most recognizable cartoon characters ever put on television. He stands around 6 feet tall, though the show has never been entirely consistent about this. He has a round, heavy body, a pale green shirt, and dark brown trousers. His hair is a muted brown, and he wears wire-rimmed glasses that have a subtle character of their own. They sit on his face like they have always been there and always will be. His chin is large and square, giving him that distinctive silhouette that anyone who has watched even a single episode of the show could draw from memory in under 10 seconds. Peter's voice, as we covered, was inspired by a real person, but the character himself was drawn from an older tradition of the lovable, working-class buffoon who means well even when he causes disaster. He is the spiritual descendant of Ralph Cramden from The Honeymooners and Archie Bunker from All in the Family, though filtered through a late 1990s animated sensibility that allowed him to be far more cartoonishly stupid than either of those predecessors. In the earliest episodes of the show, Peter works at a toy factory called the Happy-Go-Lucky Toy Factory, which is later replaced by his more prominent job at the Pawtucket Patriot Brewery. The brewery job suits him better as a character. Something about the idea of a man who works in a building that produces beer, surrounded by the smell of fermentation and hops, spending his days on a production floor and his evenings at a bar, it gives Peter a kind of working-class poetry. He loves beer. He loves television, especially anything from the 1970s and 1980s. He loves his friends. He loves his family. He loves himself, probably in that order. His father is Francis Griffin, an Irish Catholic man of formidable strictness who appears in several early episodes and makes no effort to conceal his disappointment in Peter. Their relationship carries a kind of generational sadness. Francis wanted a son who would be sharp and ambitious and driven, and instead he got Peter. But Peter, for his part, wanted a father who would look at him with something other than quiet contempt. And that want is one of the things that makes him occasionally sympathetic, even when he is being foolish. It is eventually revealed that Peter is not actually Francis's biological son. His biological father is a man named Mickey McFinnigan, a hard-drinking Irishman in Killarney, who Peter tracks down in the episode Peter's Two Dads. The reveal is handled with more emotional weight than you might expect from a show built on absurdist humor. Peter wants something from McFinnigan that he never quite got from Francis. Recognition, acceptance, a father who sees him. Peter's relationship with Lois is the central emotional engine of the show, at least in its original form. Lois Pewterschmidt Griffin is the daughter of a wealthy Rhode Island family who met and married Peter against her parents' wishes, which tells you a lot about who Lois is. She chose him. She kept choosing him, episode after episode, even as his behavior tested the limits of reasonable spousal tolerance. There is genuine warmth between them in the early seasons. They argue, they make up, they are physically affectionate, and they seem to genuinely like each other. That dynamic gives the show its emotional foundation. Peter's three children occupy distinct comedic roles. Meg is the teenager nobody pays enough attention to. Chris is the gentle, slightly oblivious son who bears his father's broad build and his mother's fundamental kindness. And Stewie is the baby, the genius, the wild card, the character who exists in a completely different register from everyone else in the house. What made Peter work as a protagonist in those early seasons was something simple but essential. He was dumb, but he was not cruel. He made bad decisions constantly, impulsively, without thinking through consequences, but those decisions came from a place of enthusiasm or naivety rather than malice. When he caused harm, he felt it. He apologized. He made it right. Or at least he tried. The cycle of mess-up, realization, and reconciliation was reliable enough that you could root for him even when he was being ridiculous. He also had a rich internal life that the show occasionally excavated in ways that felt genuinely surprising. His nostalgia for specific cultural moments from the 1970s and 1980s is consistent and specific enough to feel like a real personality trait rather than a writing shortcut. His relationship with his friends at the Drunken Clam has a warmth that goes beyond the comedic function those friendships serve. When Peter is happy, genuinely happy playing air guitar to a song he loves, or discovering some piece of pop culture trivia that delights him, or pulling off some ridiculous scheme against all odds, there is something contagious about it. He is an enthusiast. He commits fully to whatever he is doing, which makes even his stupidest decisions entertaining to watch. The Drunken Clam is worth its own moment of attention. It sits somewhere in Quahog, low-ceilinged and slightly dim, with a bar that Peter and his friends have worn smooth over years of occupation. It is the kind of bar that every small American city has at least one of the kind of place where the same group of men sit in the same seats every night, and the bartender already knows what they are drinking before they sit down. Horace ran the bar for most of the show's early run, a quiet presence behind the counter who provided drinks and minimal commentary on whatever scheme Peter was cooking up. The bar exists at the center of the show's masculine social world. Peter, Glenn Quagmire, Joe Swanson, and Cleveland Brown gathered there the way people gather at church or at school, not because it is obligatory, but because it is the organizing principle of their shared life. The conversations that happened at the Drunken Clam ranged from trivially absurd to unexpectedly tender. It was a place where the characters could be honest with each other in the particular way that men are honest when they are sitting at a bar at the end of the day, when the performance of competence can be set aside for a few hours. Peter Griffin's full name is Peter Löwenbräu Griffin. His middle name is the brand of a German beer, which is either the laziest or the most perfect detail the writers ever came up with, and the fact that it is never explained or commented upon makes it somehow even better. He was born on February 28, though the show is inconsistent enough about timelines that any specific date should be treated as approximate rather than canonical. He has a genius IQ in one episode and the cognitive function of a small child in another. He once had amnesia. He once became a pirate. He once had his own television network. He once became addicted to crack. He once briefly believed he was a robot. He has, at various points, befriended various celebrities, gotten into elaborate feuds with various neighbors, and managed to survive experiences that would have killed a less cartoonishly resilient person. He has had his kneecap shot, his spine damaged, his face reconstructed, and still manages to show up at the brewery on Monday morning as if nothing happened. The show around him breathes easier when Peter is being written as someone you can follow rather than someone you want to escape from. The best Peter Griffin episodes are the ones where his specific brand of enthusiasm collides with a situation that has real stakes, even if those stakes are absurd ones. The episode A Hero Sits Next Door from Season 1, where Peter becomes jealous of his new neighbor, Joe Swanson's effortless popularity, is a perfect example of Peter at his best. His jealousy is petty and a little ridiculous, but it makes total sense as a human emotion. He wants to be seen. He wants to be admired. He feels outshined, and his response to feeling outshined is to do something characteristically Peter about it. That is the man at the center of this whole universe. Round, loud, loyal in his own chaotic way, and perpetually convinced that the next scheme is the one that is going to work out fine. Part 3. Stewie Griffin, the baby who wanted the world. Stuart Gilligan Griffin, 1 year old, red overalls over a yellow shirt, a head shaped like a rugby ball, with 7 strands of dark hair combed over the top, eyes wide and slightly unsettling. A British accent so precise and elevated that it sounds like it was imported directly from the Oxford Faculty Lounge. Stewie Griffin is one of the most singular characters ever to appear in American animated television. There is no real precedent for him. You cannot trace him back to an archetype the way you can trace Peter back to Ralph Cramden, or Brian back to the witty sidekick tradition. Stewie was genuinely new, a 1-year-old baby who spoke like a Bond villain, built functional superweapons in his bedroom, and spent the majority of his waking hours either attempting to murder his mother or plotting the subjugation of all humanity. And the thing is, it worked. It worked completely and totally from the very first moment. Seth MacFarlane said he got there by starting with a simple idea. He wanted to take the voice of Rex Harrison, specifically Harrison's performance as Professor Henry Higgins in My Fair Lady, all that clipped precision and theatrical imperiousness, and put it inside an infant. In a 2012 interview on Fresh Air, he described it this way: "There was something about Harrison that he found amusing and ridiculous, and the idea of placing that voice in the body of a baby created a comedic gap so wide and so specific that it generated infinite material just by existing. You did not need elaborate plots. You just needed Stewie sitting in a high chair eating strained peas while monologuing about his plans to enslave the Western Hemisphere." The contrast did all the work. In the first season, Stewie's full name is revealed to be Stuart Gilligan Griffin. He was born on the 11th of September 1998, just weeks before the show's fictional timeline begins. He reaches his first birthday in the Season 1 episode Chitty Chitty Death Bang, and then in the timeless tradition of cartoon physics, he simply stops aging there. He has been 1 year old across more than 2.5 decades of episodes, though the world around him has continued to change in ways that occasionally contradict the math. His stated motivation in the early seasons is dual and explicit. He wants to kill his mother, Lois, and he wants to take over the world. These two goals receive roughly equal screen time, though the Lois killing tends to generate more personal drama given the domestic context. He blames her for his 9-month imprisonment in what he memorably calls her ovarian Bastille, and he approaches the project of her elimination with the patience and thoroughness of a professional. Poison, ray guns, booby traps, elaborate mechanical contraptions, mind control devices. Stewie cycles through methods the way a chef cycles through recipes, always refining, always looking for something that will finally work. His bedroom is the most extraordinary space in the Griffin house, though the family either cannot see what is in it or cannot process what they are looking at. Inside those four walls, Stewie has constructed devices that should be physically impossible. A fully functional time machine, a portal to parallel universes, a ray gun that actually works, a weather control device, a mind control helmet, a teleportation pad, a rocket, several tanks. He has built infrastructure that would make a defense contractor weep with jealousy, all from a bedroom that also contains a crib, a mobile hanging from the ceiling, and a beloved stuffed bear named Rupert. Rupert deserves a paragraph of his own. Stewie's relationship with Rupert is one of the show's most reliably tender and quietly funny recurring elements. Rupert is, by all conventional measures, an inanimate stuffed animal. He does not speak. He does not move. He sits where Stewie places him, button-eyed and patient. But Stewie talks to him as though he is the most astute conversationalist in the house. He confides in Rupert. He takes Rupert's apparent counsel on difficult decisions. He becomes genuinely distressed when Rupert is damaged or lost. In the Road to Rupert episode from Season 5, Rupert gets accidentally sold at a garage sale, and Stewie's response to this is so disproportionate to the inciting incident that it becomes its own kind of comedy. The desperation of a character who has built one of his few genuine emotional attachments around an object that cannot technically experience emotions. The question of who can understand Stewie is one of the show's most delightfully inconsistent running elements. In the earlier seasons, the rule seemed to be that most adults hear Stewie as baby babble. Lois coos at him. Peter ignores him. Random strangers smile and pat his head. But Brian can understand him, and their dialogue is completely fluent. Occasionally, other characters seem to understand specific things Stewie says, or understand the general drift without getting all the words. There are episodes where the entire family understands him clearly. There are others where he delivers a 5-minute monologue about world domination, and Lois responds by offering him a bottle. The show never fully committed to a rule, which is probably the right call, a rigid consistency about who can hear what would have constrained some of the best comedy. Brian's ability to understand Stewie is the foundation of their friendship. In the first season, they are barely friends. Brian tolerates Stewie in the way a tired adult tolerates a persistent child. But something about the combination of Stewie's intelligence and Brian's equally outsized sense of his own intelligence created a natural gravity between them, and by season 2 they were spending enough time together that the chemistry was impossible to ignore. Their dynamic is one of the show's great creative achievements. Brian brings sardonic maturity. Stewie brings theatrical intensity. Neither is above using the other for their own purposes. But beneath the manipulation, there is genuine affection, and the show knows how to let that affection surface without sentimentalizing it into something soft. In the episode Brian and Stewie from Season 8, the two of them spend an entire episode locked inside a bank vault with nothing but each other and a gun that Brian keeps in a safety deposit box. No cutaways. No other characters. Just two voices, two personalities, and a conversation that eventually arrives at something unexpectedly honest and vulnerable. It is one of the most purely effective half hours the show ever produced, and it works entirely because of the relationship those two characters had built over 7 seasons of shared screen time. Stewie's specific list of accomplishments across the show's run reads like the dossier of a very small, very busy supervillain. He has traveled through time on multiple occasions. He has visited parallel universes. He has gone to war literally, the Second World War in the Road to Germany episode, where he and Brian chase Mort Goldman into 1939 Poland and have to fight their way out of Nazi-occupied Europe. He briefly took over the entire world, though the show later revealed this was a simulation. He has cloned himself, killed the clone, and possibly gotten the outcome of that, reverse the episode The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair, ends ambiguously enough that the question of whether the original Stewie or his evil duplicate has been inhabiting the house since then is technically unresolved. He has flirted with supervillainy, actual villainy, and anti-heroism at various points, and the show has never quite settled on which one he is in the current moment. What never changes, across all the character evolution and plot experimentation, is his voice. That accent. The way he delivers every sentence as though he is simultaneously performing it for an audience and meaning every word, the contempt and the warmth existing in the same breath. The enormous vocabulary deployed with the confidence of someone who has never once worried about whether his conversation partner will be able to keep up. Seth MacFarlane's vocal performance as Stewie is extraordinary in its consistency and commitment. He has been doing that voice for over 25 years without it ever sounding like something put on. In 2026, it was announced that Stewie would be getting his own spin-off series, simply titled Stewie, which received a 2-season order from Fox and was scheduled to premiere during the 2027 to 28 television season. What that show will look like, whether it will return him to his villainous roots or continue exploring the more emotionally complex version of the character that the later seasons developed, remains to be seen. But the character we sleep to tonight is the original one, the baby in the high chair, the one with the ray gun in his crib and the map of European capitals pinned to his bedroom wall, and the absolute certainty that the world would eventually be his. That's Stewie. Part 4. Brian Griffin, the dog who read Hemingway. There is a particular kind of man who keeps a half-read novel on his nightstand for so long that it becomes furniture, who talks about writing in bars, who orders drinks with the studied casualness of someone who has spent a lot of time deciding what a sophisticated person orders, who is genuinely charming in the right circumstances and genuinely insufferable in others, who means well most of the time, fails at least as often as he succeeds, and carries a persistent, low-grade melancholy about the distance between who he is and who he believes he should be. Brian Griffin is that man, in dog form, living in a house that is not technically his, driving a car, drinking martinis, talking about his novel. Brian H. Griffin. His middle initial is never fully explained. He was born on the 22nd of October 1999 in Austin, Texas, and his backstory revealed in the Road to Rhode Island episode is more melancholy than you might expect from an animated show's pet character. His mother died young, abandoned by Brian's litter after she was sold, and Brian did not get a proper goodbye. When he and Stewie finally visit her birthplace during their road trip across the country, there is a quiet sadness in the sequence that sits at the edges of the comedy without overwhelming it. He ended up with the Griffin family when Peter found him as a stray. The specifics vary slightly depending on which flashback you consult, but the general shape of it is, Brian was alone, Peter offered him kindness, and that was enough. He has been part of the family ever since, walking upright, sleeping in a bedroom, spending evenings at the Drunken Clam with Peter, and serving as the closest thing the show has to a conscience in its early seasons. Brian's voice is MacFarlane's own natural voice. No affectation, no accent, no falsetto, just MacFarlane talking. This choice turns out to be brilliant because it creates an intimacy between Brian and the audience that no other character in the show quite manages. When Brian speaks, it sounds like a real person speaking. It sounds like someone you might actually know. In the original seasons, Brian functions as the grounded center of the show's comedy. He is the one who sees clearly what everyone else is too caught up in themselves to notice. When Peter announces some scheme that is obviously going to end badly, Brian is the one in the room quietly calculating exactly how badly it is going to end and how much of the fallout he is going to be personally responsible for cleaning up. His relationship with Peter is built on genuine affection expressed through constant mutual exasperation. He loves Peter in the way you love a friend who is impossible but irreplaceable, with your eyes open, without illusions, and with the full knowledge that walking away is not actually an option. His failed novel is one of the show's great running character details. Brian has been working on a novel for years, possibly decades by the show's internal logic, and it is never finished and never particularly good when portions of it are revealed. The novel represents everything Brian wants to be: a serious artist, a real intellectual, a man who has contributed something lasting to the world, and his inability to complete it is the show's way of gently but consistently deflating his self-image. He is bright, but he is not quite as bright as he believes he is. He is literary, but not quite at the level he aspires to. He is sophisticated, but not so sophisticated that he cannot be fooled by his own pretensions. He drinks too much. This is established early and never really resolved. The drinking gives him a slightly blurred quality in social situations, and it is one of the details that makes him feel genuinely human rather than simply a well-drawn comic type. Nobody who is purely the voice of reason in a sitcom has a drinking problem that the show treats as an actual character trait rather than a punchline. His romantic life in the early seasons is written with a surprising amount of sympathy. Brian falls in love readily and disastrously. He has a long-standing, mostly suppressed attraction to Lois that surfaces in small, telling ways, without ever becoming the central plot of many episodes. He falls for women who are wrong for him for entirely predictable reasons that he cannot see clearly from inside the situation. His heartbreaks feel real in a way that animated characters' heartbreaks often do not, because the writing takes them seriously rather than undercutting them immediately with a joke. There is an episode in Season 6 where Brian develops a relationship with a woman named Jillian, and the comedy of that relationship comes from the fact that Jillian is significantly less intellectually formidable than Brian thinks he needs a partner to be, and that Brian stays with her longer than he should because the companionship is real even if the compatibility is not. It is a recognizable human situation, and the show treats it with enough care that it lands rather than just playing for laughs. Brian's ongoing tensions with Quagmire become one of the show's most interesting recurring dynamics in the middle seasons. Quagmire's speech in Jerome is the New Black from Season 8, where he methodically catalogs every genuine failing of Brian's character to Brian's face, is remarkable for being simultaneously funny and completely accurate. Everything Quagmire says can be verified by the show's own catalog of Brian's behavior. He hits on Lois constantly. He neglects his responsibilities as a parent. He presents himself as intellectually superior to everyone around him, while consistently making choices that undercut that presentation. He is, Quagmire says, a fraud. What makes that speech resonate beyond its comedic function is that the show clearly understands it to be true. The writers know Brian's flaws. They have been writing them carefully enough that someone paying attention can produce a detailed critique without working very hard. The question Quagmire's speech raises, whether Brian will hear it and change, is the interesting one. The answer the show eventually gives is mostly no, with occasional heartening exceptions, which is itself a kind of honesty about how people actually work. Brian has 4 paws. He also has a driver's license and a white 2004 Prius, which he bought in Season 4. He attended Brown University, or at least attended it briefly before dropping out, which is a detail that tells you exactly what you need to know about how he sees himself. Brown is the Ivy League school that is close enough to prestigious to name drop and specific enough in its cultural associations to be worth the joke. He did not finish his degree, and the fact that he still brings it up is perfect. He has a son. Dylan Flanagan appears in the episode The Former Life of Brian from Season 7, the product of a relationship Brian had years earlier that he did not know had resulted in a child. Dylan is troubled, somewhat directionless, and carries enough of Brian's personality in filtered form to make Brian's inadequacy as a father feel genuinely uncomfortable when he fails to step up. The episode is one of the more quietly pointed things the show has done with the character, because it removes all the comfortable distance with Brian's usual detachment and makes him face something that actually requires him rather than just asks him to have opinions about it. In Season 12, Brian is hit by a car and dies. The show genuinely commits to the death for 2 full episodes. The family mourns. A new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, is introduced as a replacement. Fans were devastated enough that the reaction made national news. Then Stewie uses a stolen time machine to go back and prevent the accident, and Brian is alive again before the month is out. The emotional whiplash of that sequence is significant enough that it changed how the audience relates to major plot developments on the show. A certain skepticism settled in, a sense that consequences are not real consequences. But we are not here to sleep to consequences. We are here to sleep to the version of Brian who is sitting in his chair in the Griffin living room with a martini and a half-read book, occasionally saying something so sharp it surprises everyone, including himself, being Peter's best friend in the imperfect and enduring way that actually means something. Part 5. The Spooner Street Brotherhood, Quagmire, Joe, and Cleveland. The Griffin family lives at 31 Spooner Street in Quahog, and on either side and across the way, a specific constellation of neighbors has assembled itself into something that functions like a second family. These are Peter's friends, his bar companions, the men he calls when he needs help with something ridiculous or when he wants to celebrate something improbable. Glenn Quagmire, Joe Swanson, Cleveland Brown. Three very different men who have ended up, through geographic proximity and the particular chemistry of male friendship, as the permanent supporting cast of Peter Griffin's life. Glenn Quagmire lives at 29 Spooner Street, right next door to the Griffins. He drives a red 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, which tells you a lot. He works as a commercial airline pilot, which also tells you a lot. His birth name is Glenn Quagelchek. The Quagmire surname came from a college acquaintance of McFarland's, chosen for its double meaning, soft-yielding soil and a situation that is very difficult to escape. Both meanings apply. McFarland created Quagmire's voice by studying the fast-talking radio pitchmen of the 1930s and 1940s, the enthusiastic, relentlessly upbeat announcers who hawked products over the airwaves with a kind of manic cheerfulness that felt slightly unhinged even in its own time. He has described the character as a 50s radio guy on coke, which is maybe the most efficient character description ever produced for a fictional person. The giggity catchphrase came from a Jerry Lewis impression that writer Steve Marmel did in the writer's room, which McFarland adapted and gave to Quagmire, and which then escaped the show entirely and entered the general cultural vocabulary in a way that none of them could have predicted in 1999. McFarland has said publicly that he considers Quagmire an appalling human being who is still caught in the Rat Pack era. This is accurate. Quagmire approaches the world, and specifically the women in it, as though the 1950s rules of masculine social behavior are still fully operational and totally acceptable. His worldview is cheerfully unreconstructed in ways that the show deploys partly for comedy and partly in some of his more prominent storylines for something closer to genuine moral reckoning. His backstory has accumulated considerable depth over the show's run. He served as an ensign in the U.S. Navy, which is where he first met Peter. He had a career as a Korean soap opera actor under the name American Johnny during a service posting in Busan. He once dated model Cheryl Tiegs in the early 1980s, and the dissolution of that relationship is treated as the emotional wound at the center of his character, his hypersexuality in later years. The show suggests is at least partly an attempt to fill the space that Cheryl left behind. His family has gradually expanded on screen in ways that add layers to what could have been a purely comedic character. His father, Dan, is introduced as a naval veteran of the Vietnam War who later has a sex reassignment and takes the name Ida. His sister Brenda appears in a genuinely serious episode called Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, in which she is in an abusive relationship with a man named Jeff. Quagmire ultimately kills Jeff to protect his sister, and the episode handles this with enough weight that it functions as something close to drama rather than comedy. His daughter Anna Lee, discovered in the Quagmire's Baby episode, is given up for adoption but remains a presence in his story. There is a scene, and this comes up every time anyone discusses Quagmire's depth as a character in Jerome is the New Black, where he explains to Brian at length and in devastating detail why he dislikes him. But before he gets there, we learn something unexpected. Quagmire volunteers at a homeless shelter. He holds a book club in his living room and argues passionately about the interpretation of specific poems. He has layers that his surface presentation, the leering, the giggity, the relentless pursuit actively conceals. The show knows those layers are there and occasionally lets them breathe. Joe Swanson arrived on Spooner Street in the first season episode A Hero Sits Next Door as the new neighbor who immediately makes Peter feel outcompeted. Joe is a police officer, powerfully built, with a strong jaw and the bearing of someone who has been telling people what to do for a long time. He is also a paraplegic who uses a wheelchair after an injury sustained in the line of duty. The backstory of exactly how it happened shifts between tellings, which the show eventually acknowledged as a running joke about Joe's tendency to romanticize and embellish his own history. Patrick Warburton voices Joe with a particular quality that is genuinely difficult to describe. Joe's voice is deep and certain in a way that suggests someone who has never in his life been unsure of himself And then Warburton finds the small frequency of anxiety and yearning underneath that certainty and lets it surface just often enough to make Joe feel real rather than just functional. Joe is the friend in the group who everyone respects even when he is being made the butt of a joke. There is an inherent dignity to him that the show relies on, because without it, the jokes about his disability would curdle into something cruel rather than sitting in the complicated space they actually occupy. Joe is married to Bonnie Swanson, who spends several seasons visibly pregnant before finally giving birth to a son named Susie in a later episode. Their marriage is one of the show's more honestly complicated relationships. Bonnie's feelings about Joe evolve across the seasons in ways that are not always comfortable to watch, and the episodes that deal directly with the state of their marriage are sometimes the most structurally interesting episodes of the show's run because they are asking real questions about long-term partnership and how people change. Cleveland Brown is the most soft-spoken member of the group, a man with a gentle nature and a measured way of speaking that puts him in constant contrast with the louder personalities around him. He runs a deli called Cleveland's Deli and later a restaurant, and his defining characteristic in his early seasons is his patience, a seemingly inexhaustible capacity to absorb whatever the situation around him is serving and respond with something reasonable. He is voiced by Mike Henry, who met McFarlane at the Rhode Island School of Design. Henry voiced Cleveland from the show's beginning until 2020, when he announced his decision to step away from the role, citing his belief that it was no longer appropriate for a white actor to voice a black character. The role was subsequently recast. Cleveland's first marriage to Loretta ends in devastating fashion when it is revealed that Loretta has been having an affair with Quagmire. The episode The Cleveland-Loretta Quagmire handles this with a mixture of comedy and genuine emotional weight. And Cleveland's response when he finally learns the truth is one of the rare moments in the early seasons where the show lets a character actually feel something for more than a few seconds before undercutting it. Cleveland mourns. He is genuinely hurt. And then he keeps showing up at the bar, because that is what the Drunken Clam Brotherhood demands of its members. He later gets his own spin-off series, The Cleveland Show, which ran from 2009 to 2013 and followed him to his hometown in Virginia after remarrying. But on Spooner Street, in the bar, beside Peter and Quagmire and Joe, that is where Cleveland belongs. That is where he makes the most sense. Part 6. The World of Quahog. Every street, every bar, every corner. Quahog, Rhode Island is a fictional city, but across more than 25 years of episodes, it has accumulated enough specific geography, recurring institutions, and established landmarks to function like a real place in the imagination of anyone who has watched enough of the show. The name Quahog comes from the hard-shell clam native to the North Atlantic coast. Rhode Island has a real relationship with the Quahog clam. It is woven into the regional cuisine and culture, and naming the fictional city after it grounds the show in a very specific kind of New England identity. Quahog is working class. It has a port feel, a certain salt-air pragmatism, a social world built around bars and diners and neighborhood friendships, rather than anything cosmopolitan. Spooner Street is the show's residential center. The Griffin House at number 31 is a two-story colonial in a shade of yellow that reads as cheerful from a distance and somewhat faded up close. The layout of the interior is established enough that you could draw a rough floor plan from memory if you have watched the show long enough. Living room in front, kitchen behind it, staircase leading to the bedrooms, Stewie's room at the end of the hall with its improbable concealed laboratory, Brian's water dish by the kitchen counter, Peter's chair in front of the television. The Drunken Clam is Peter's primary habitat outside of his house and his job. It sits somewhere in Quahog with the vague, approximate positioning that bars in American sitcoms tend to have close enough that the characters can walk to it after a dramatic conversation, far enough that it feels like a destination. Inside, it is the kind of bar that has been the same for decades. Neon signs behind the bar that have been there so long their colors have mellowed. A pool table that gets used occasionally. A jukebox. Bar stools that have the comfortable solidity of furniture that nobody has thought about replacing because it still works. Horace, the original bartender of the Drunken Clam, is one of those supporting characters whose presence gives a location its texture. He does not say much. He serves drinks and occasionally offers a dry comment on whatever is happening, and his consistency is part of what makes the bar feel like a real place. When the drunken clam burns down in one later episode and is briefly replaced by a British pub, the wrongness of that change is physical. The audience feels it before any character articulates it, because the drunken clam is not just a location, it is an emotional anchor. James Woods Regional High School is where Meg and later Chris attend school. The school is named after actor James Woods, who has appeared in several episodes in a recurring gag involving his celebrity status and Peter's particular fixation on it. The school's interior is sketched in just enough detail to support the episodes that take place there. Lockers, hallways, a gymnasium, classrooms with teachers whose recurring appearances give the setting continuity. The Pawtucket Patriot Brewery is where Peter has worked for most of the show's run. The specific details of his job there are flexible depending on the episode's needs, but the baseline is that he works on some kind of production floor in a blue-collar capacity. The brewery's owner, Angela, becomes a recurring character and a complicated figure in Peter's professional life. She is his boss, and the dynamic between them shifts over many seasons. When Angela dies in a later episode, the show handles her death with genuine feeling, partly because Carrie Fisher, who voiced the character, had passed away in 2016. Quahog's media landscape is surprisingly well developed. Quahog 5 News serves as the city's primary television news outlet, and its anchors Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons appear frequently enough to qualify as real supporting characters. Tom Tucker has a son named Jake who becomes a minor recurring presence. Diane Simmons has a genuine arc across the series that culminates in a dramatic Season 9 episode. Asian correspondent Trisha Takanawa delivers field reports with a particular deadpan that the show uses consistently. The news desk is one of the show's reliable sources of local atmosphere, because every city has a local news station with anchors who have been there too long and know the community in the particular way that people know the community when they have reported on it for decades. The Griffin family's church appears periodically, adding a religious dimension to Quahog's civic life. Mayor Adam West, the fictional version of the real actor who played Batman in the 1966 television series, served as Quahog's mayor across multiple seasons and is one of the show's most consistently inventive, recurring characters. Adam West played a version of himself that was willing to commit to any absurdity the writers could produce with complete earnestness, and the results were almost always funny. When the real Adam West died in 2017, the show wrote the character out of the story with a farewell that carried genuine warmth. Dr. Hartman is Quahog's primary physician, and his recurring appearances in medical contexts give the show one of its most reliable sources of dry, uncomfortable comedy. He delivers bad news with a particular clumsiness that the show returns to consistently. The "You Have AIDS" barbershop quartet scene, in which Peter bursts into a hospital room to deliver an AIDS diagnosis via song, originates in a flashback where Dr. Hartman admits he does not know how to deliver bad news, and suggests that Peter, who claims to be good at this, handle it instead. The results are operatic in their wrongness. Herbert, the elderly neighbor, is one of the show's most discussed and most polarizing recurring characters, a very old man with a wheezing voice and an openly stated, if never explicitly depicted, interest in teenage boys. The character makes many people deeply uncomfortable, which is entirely the point of him. His scenes with Chris in particular have a quality of dark comic tension that the show deploys consistently. McFarlane said in commentary that Herbert was inspired by a specific type of neighborhood elder figure, and that the comedy comes from the character's own complete lack of awareness about how he is perceived. Chris, for his part, is largely oblivious. Mort Goldman, the town's pharmacist, occupies a specific place in Quahog's social ecosystem. He is anxious, frequently victimized by circumstance, and prone to the kinds of accidents that seem to find certain people disproportionately. His son Neil Goldman has a persistent crush on Meg that the show uses for consistent low-level comedy in the school episodes. The Goldman family represents a kind of Jewish-American suburban experience that the show engages with in varying degrees of sensitivity across its run. The entire city of Quahog feels, when it is being written well, like a place you have been. Not literally, it does not exist, but emotionally. The damp New England air, the bars that stay the same while the people in them change, the particular combination of blue-collar pragmatism and occasional civic pride that defines a certain kind of American small city. It is a real place in the same sense that any well-drawn fictional world is a real place. You can inhabit it in your imagination. and the geography is consistent enough that you trust it. Part 7. The Cutaway Universe, every random gag, every detour. There is a specific rhythm to Family Guy that no other television show has ever quite replicated. A character says something that functions as a setup. The screen cuts to somewhere else, entirely a different time, a different country, sometimes a different planet. A gag plays out, brief or extended, related, or completely unmoored from anything that preceded it. The screen cuts back. The character who provided the setup is still standing where they were, the plot resumes, and the cutaway has already become a separate artifact, floating in the memory detached from whatever story it interrupted. This is the cutaway gag, and it is one of the most distinctive comedy structures in the history of American television. The setup usually follows a formula, though the formula has enough variations to prevent it from becoming entirely predictable. This is worse than the time. A character begins a sentence that references some remembered experience, and instead of finishing the sentence in dialogue, the show simply shows it. Or a character makes a comparison, and the show visualizes the comparison. Or someone uses an idiom and the show takes it literally. The machinery is simple. The possibilities are endless. In the early seasons, the cutaways were short. Most of them lasted between 5 and 20 seconds. They were sharp intrusions of absurdism into the ongoing story, a sudden left turn that lasted just long enough to land its joke before the show got back on the road. The cutaways in season 1 and 2 feel like the show enjoying itself in small bursts. They are the equivalent of a comedian doing an impression mid-sentence and then returning to the anecdote without breaking stride. The cultural touchstones that the cutaways reach for are particular and consistent. Family Guy's cutaway universe has an obsession with specific decades of American pop culture, the 1970s, the 1980s, and to a lesser extent the 1990s. References to specific television shows, specific actors, specific cultural moments from those periods appear constantly, deployed with the assumption that the audience has shared enough of the same cultural exposure to recognize them. When they land when the reference is precise enough and the execution is fast enough, the result is a very particular kind of comedy that feels like shared memory being riffed on. The show's relationship with celebrities in its cutaways is worth noting. Family Guy will casually depict famous people in scenarios that range from mildly absurd to genuinely surreal, and the show has always relied on the assumption that the audience's familiarity with whoever is being referenced will do half the comic work. Conway Twitty, the real Conway Twitty. A country singer active from the 1950s through the 1990s became a recurring element in the show's middle seasons in the form of extended cutaways, where the show would simply play a full Conway Twitty performance. In its entirety, no joke, no punchline. Just Conway Twitty performing one of his songs while the episode waited for him to finish. The comedy, such as it was, came entirely from the duration of the bit and the audience's awareness that the show was making them sit through a complete country ballad for reasons that were never explained. The chicken fight with Ernie is the most cinematic form the cutaway gag ever takes. We will get to that in detail in the next section. But there are other extended bits that operate in a similar register. Peter's intermittent obsession with Surfin' Bird by the Trashmen, a song he rediscovers in the season 7 episode, I Dream of Jesus, and then plays and sings relentlessly for an entire week, is a cutaway that became a recurring element, appearing in multiple episodes across multiple seasons. The joke is the song's annoyingness, deployed with an almost hostile commitment to duration. Peter will sing the chorus again and again and again, each repetition a small act of aggression against anyone listening, and the show knows this and commits to it anyway. Peter claiming expertise he does not have and then being shown in flashback disastrously applying that expertise is another reliable cutaway structure. Peter confidently asserting that he was a great surgeon. Peter confidently asserting that he was a skilled negotiator. Peter confidently asserting that he had a talent for cooking, or magic, or some specific athletic discipline. The cutaway then shows the reality of that talent in action, and the gap between the confidence and the outcome is where the comedy lives. There are cutaways that are simply pure absurdism, untethered from any setup logic at all. A scene that appears to have no origin in anything the characters were discussing, presenting some situation so specific and strange that the question of why it exists is itself funny. These are the cutaways that the show's critics most accurately identify as interchangeable. You could move them from one episode to another and nothing would break. But they are also sometimes the most purely inventive moments the show produces because they are freed from the obligation of connecting to anything. The cutaway universe has an internal logic that is never stated but can be felt. It is a space where the rules of the main show do not apply. In the cutaway universe, Peter is just as likely to be a pirate captain as a brewery worker. The year could be 1974 or 2047. Celebrity appearances are casual and inexplicable. Fictional characters from other shows exist in the same space as real historical figures. A cutaway can take place in space, in ancient Rome, inside a video game, in the middle of a war that no one is winning, or at a party attended by people who should not logically know each other. The South Park episode Cartoon Wars from 2006 famously criticized Family Guy's writing by depicting its cutaway gags as produced by manatees, randomly pushing idea balls together, the suggestion being that the connection between the cutaway and its setup was so arbitrary that no actual creative intelligence was required to produce them. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the show's creators, were public about their feelings regarding this. Writers from The Simpsons and King of the Hill reportedly called to thank them for making the episode. MacFarlane's response at the time was characteristically direct. He disagreed, he said so, and he moved on. But the criticism stuck in the cultural memory because it identified something real. As the show progressed, the ratio of plot to cutaway shifted in ways that changed the nature of what the show was. Whether that shift made it worse is a subjective question. Whether the shift happened is not. What is worth noting, for the purposes of a late-night exploration of everything you love about Family Guy, is that the cutaway universe is where the show's imagination runs freest. It is where you get the barbershop quartet singing "You Have AIDS." It is where you get Peter brokering peace negotiations between countries he cannot find on a map. It is where you get references so obscure that only maybe 12 people watching actually get them, but those 12 people feel a specific joy. The cutaway is Family Guy's most private joke told to everyone, understood by each viewer in their own specific way. Part 8. The giant chicken fights a cinema of pure violence. Everything stops. Whatever was happening in the episode, whatever conversation Peter was in the middle of, whatever scene had been building, whatever narrative logic the episode had been following up to that moment, it all stops. Because Ernie the Giant Chicken has appeared. Ernie the Giant Chicken is an anthropomorphic bird who stands roughly the height of a large man and carries himself with the confidence of someone who has been in many fights and won most of them. He has feathers, a beak, and eyes that hold exactly the specific kind of smoldering grievance that you see in someone who has been nursing a very particular grudge for a very long time. The grudge, revealed in the Season 2 episode, Da Boom, began with an expired coupon. Ernie handed Peter a coupon that had passed its expiration date. Peter, being Peter, did not take this calmly. He attacked. The violence that followed was extended, escalating, and spectacularly destructive, ending with Ernie apparently dead. But Ernie was not dead. He woke up. This is the essential structure of every subsequent chicken fight. Peter and Ernie encounter each other, usually mid-scene with no warning, and immediately engage in combat that lasts somewhere between 3 and 8 minutes and destroys an impressive amount of infrastructure in the process. They have fought in office buildings, subway tunnels, airports, on cruise ships, on airplanes, at train stations, through theme parks, across Ferris wheels, in the sewers, and at a restaurant where they both insisted on paying the bill. The fights are choreographed with a cinematic specificity that stands out from the rest of the show's animation. They reference actual action movie sequences. The airplane propeller death from Raiders of the Lost Ark appears, inverted, as something that merely inconveniences Ernie. The fight in No Chris Left Behind includes an Enter the Dragon homage where Ernie licks his own blood from his finger with the concentrated cool of someone who has watched that movie many times and is committed to the reference. What makes the chicken fights function so well as a comedy structure is the absolute commitment of the show to their internal logic. Peter always wins. Ernie always survives. The episode always resumes afterward exactly where it left off, with Peter walking back into the frame looking like he has been through a moderate to severe natural disaster and picking up the conversation mid-sentence. The world around them is demolished. People have been caught in the crossfire. Buildings have collapsed. And Peter just brushes himself off and says what he was going to say. Ernie, it turns out, has a home life. In the third fight, after the combat reaches an apparent standoff, Ernie takes Peter to dinner with his wife, Nicole, another giant chicken, and the two of them sit across from each other in a restaurant in the kind of awkward silence that two people maintain when they cannot actually remember what they are fighting about. They reconcile. They reach an understanding. They agree that maybe the whole thing has gone on long enough. Then they fight again over who is going to pay the check. There is a detail buried in the mythology that gives Ernie a strange additional dimension. He is apparently the product of a failed cloning experiment by Dr. Hartman. What kind of cloning experiment produces a man-sized anthropomorphic chicken with a specific, lasting grudge about coupon policy is not explained, and it does not need to be. The detail simply exists, adding a layer of absurd origin story to a character who already exists at a register of complete absurdism. In the Season 12 episode Internal Affairs, the fight takes on a time travel dimension when the two combatants stumble onto Stewie's time pad mid-brawl and end up fighting across multiple time periods. They are in ancient Rome. They are in the far future. They are in a genetic research lab. They are in space. The fight continues in each setting with the same basic energy and the same lack of resolution, because the specific combat grammar of a chicken fight does not change just because the temporal context has shifted. Ernie the Giant Chicken's death, confirmed by a Family Guy executive producer in October 2025, was administered by Meg Griffin, who ripped his head off in a manner the show apparently handled with characteristic commitment. The confirmation that Ernie was truly dead this time, and not simply reviving off-screen for a future confrontation, marked a genuine end to one of the show's longest-running recurring elements. Something about that finality carries weight even in the context of an animated comedy. Ernie was part of the furniture. His periodic appearance meant the show was operating at a particular frequency, self-aware, cinematic, committed to its own internal mythology. That frequency is something you feel in your body when the familiar horn stings sound at the beginning of a chicken fight, and the knowledge that it will not play again carries a small, specific melancholy. But tonight we can hear it in our memory. The screen cuts. Peter's head turns. His eyes narrow. The chicken is there, standing in the background with that smoldering look. And Peter says the only thing he ever says in this situation, "You again." And then the music starts. Part 9. Road to Everything: Brian and Stewie's Adventures. Every great comedy duo has a format that suits them better than any other. For Brian and Stewie, that format is the road trip. The Road To. Episodes are Family Guy's most critically admired recurring format, a series of 8 installments spread across the show's run, in which Brian and Stewie leave Quahog behind entirely and go somewhere across the country, across Europe, back in time, across the multiverse, and the show expands into something larger and more cinematically ambitious than it is in its regular episodes. The rest of the Griffin family recedes. The usual Quahog plot machinery is set aside. It is just the two of them, moving through space or time or parallel dimensions, arguing with each other and occasionally singing. The format is an homage to the Bob Hope and Bing Crosby Road To film series from the 1940s and 1950s. McFarlane is a genuine enthusiast for that era of American entertainment. The big band music, the sharp banter, the elaborate theatrical musical numbers, the casual virtuosity of that specific Hollywood style. The Road To films featuring Hope and Crosby were built around the same dynamic that Brian and Stewie have. Two mismatched personalities, one more bumbling and one more self-assured, thrown into an exotic location and made to improvise their way out. The Family Guy episodes pay tribute to this by including elaborate musical numbers, by having the characters occasionally break the fourth wall, and by structuring the adventures with a theatrical looseness that lets the comedy breathe. The first one, Road to Rhode Island, aired on the 30th of May, 2000, in Season 2. Brian volunteers to pick up Stewie from his grandparents' home in Palm Springs, California. They lose their plane tickets. They have to get themselves back to Rhode Island by other means. Along the way, Brian visits his birthplace, discovers the circumstances of his mother's death, and gives her a proper burial. The episode ends with a musical number, Brian and Stewie in costume on a train, performing a jazz number about the journey they have just taken. It is the first time the show demonstrated that Brian and Stewie alone, in an unusual context, could carry an episode. The episode was nominated for a Primetime Emmy in the Outstanding Animated Program category, and IGN later gave it a perfect score of 10 out of 10. Road to Europe came next, in Season 3. Stewie becomes obsessed with a British children's television program called Jolly Farm Review and decides he would rather live in England than in Quahog. He stows away on a plane. Brian gets trapped on board with him. They land in the Middle East. They travel through a camel-dotted desert, steal a hot air balloon, ride a train through several countries, get high in Amsterdam, and eventually reach England only to find that the Jolly Farm Review is not what Stewie imagined. The musical number, You and I Are So Awfully Different, is a duet that captures their dynamic with a precision that the regular episode format rarely achieves. Road to Rupert in Season 5 is the one fans most often cite for its single best sequence. Stewie, enrolled in a ski competition to win back his stolen teddy bear, performing The Worry Song in a sequence that involves him dancing alongside a digitally inserted Gene Kelly from the 1945 film Anchors Away. The original sequence had Jerry Mouse dancing with Kelly. Stewie takes the mouse's place. The result is one of the most technically impressive and quietly delightful moments the show has ever produced. Road to Germany in Season 8 sends Brian and Stewie back to September 1939, the first day of the Nazi invasion of Poland, after Mort Goldman accidentally activates Stewie's time machine. The episode is the first to fully abandon any B-plot and simply let the main story run uninterrupted, and the result is a tighter and more propulsive episode than most Road episodes manage. There are action sequences. There are chase scenes. There is a moment where Stewie and Brian are about to perform a musical number for Adolf Hitler to buy themselves time to escape, and Mort interrupts and yells at them to just get in the time machine. The absence of the song is the joke, and it lands. Road to the Multiverse opens Season 8 and is probably the most formally inventive of all the Road episodes. Stewie has built a remote that allows him to travel between parallel universes. He and Brian start jumping from one to another. Each universe has a different visual style. There is a universe where humans never developed religion, and technology is centuries more advanced. There is a universe where dogs domesticated humans, and Brian is the pet. There is a universe rendered in the style of early Disney animation where singing animals invite them to eat pie and the animation is lush and beautiful, and the sequence goes on just long enough to make you feel something genuine before the show pivots back to jokes. The episode won a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Individual Achievement in Animation. Road to the North Pole is the first Road episode to run for a full hour, and it is also the most emotionally complex. Stewie decides to kill Santa Claus after a traumatic encounter with an angry mall Santa. When they finally reach the North Pole, they discover that Santa, overtaxed, exhausted, surrounded by overworked elves and feral reindeer, is barely holding together. The episode's central musical number, Christmas Time Is Killing Us, was nominated for both an Emmy and a Grammy. It is sung by the elves and expresses, in increasing desperation, the crushing weight of Christmas as an industrial operation rather than a magical one. The song is very funny and also, depending on what you bring to it, genuinely moving. Roads to Vegas in Season 11 splits Brian and Stewie into two pairs. One lucky, one unlucky after a teleportation malfunction duplicates them en route to a Celine Dion concert. The lucky pair has the best possible time in Las Vegas. The unlucky pair descends into a nightmarish sequence of debt, mobsters, and escalating desperation. The convergence of the two timelines at the episode's end is handled with a dark efficiency that feels different in tone from most of the Road episodes. Road to India in Season 14 is the most recent, and follows Brian to Mumbai after he falls for an Indian customer service representative named Padma. The Bollywood musical number is inventive enough to justify the episode's existence on its own. What the Road to episodes provide, across all 8 of them, is a space where the show can be its best version of itself. No other regular characters diluting the dynamic. No cutaways substituting for storytelling. Just these two specific personalities, pressed against each other by circumstance, working through whatever the situation requires. The musical numbers give the show room to demonstrate that McFarlane's genuine love for old-fashioned show business has somewhere to go, that it is not just affectation but actual craft. When a Road to episode appears in an episode list, something settles. You know you are going to be spending the next 22 minutes with the best version of what this show can be, and the knowledge of that is its own kind of comfort. Part 10. Meg, Chris, and Lois. The Griffin family beneath the chaos. Lois Griffin was born Lois Pewterschmidt into the kind of wealth that comes with a summer house and a set of social expectations that extend from birth to death without interruption. Her father, Carter Pewterschmidt, is a man of enormous fortune and correspondingly enormous opinions about how that fortune should influence the world around him. Her mother, Barbara, is gentler but no less aware of the family's social position. Lois was raised in a world of chandeliers and country clubs and was expected to marry within it. She chose Peter. This is the most revealing thing about Lois Griffin, and the show knows it. She had every opportunity to choose someone safe and polished and predictably successful. She chose a man who worked in a toy factory and thought Wheel of Fortune was high culture. Her reasoning, never fully explained, which is correct, seems to involve the specific kind of vitality that Peter has, the absolute absence of self-consciousness, the genuine enthusiasm for everything he encounters, regardless of how objectively silly it is. He is, in his particular way, alive in a manner that the Pewterschmidt social world is not. Alex Borstein voices Lois with an accent that is specific to certain Long Island and southern New England communities, a particular music to the vowels, a certain speed to the delivery, and it gives Lois a quality that her social background alone would not provide. She sounds like she belongs in a working-class context even when she is discussing her family's yacht. The performance is one of the most consistent and reliable things in the show's long run. Lois is, in the early seasons, the person who makes the household function. She is the one who knows where everything is, who manages the logistics of family life, who provides the emotional reality check that Peter's schemes require. She plays piano. She is a genuinely good cook. She has opinions about politics and culture that are more considered than anyone else in the family except possibly Brian. She is patient in ways that seem to exceed what is reasonable, and the show occasionally gives her episodes that let her patience run out entirely and shows what Lois Griffin looks like when she is done being the reasonable one. The episode Lethal Weapons from Season 3, where Lois discovers that she has a talent and an appetite for physical combat, is one of the early season's best Lois episodes, precisely because it takes the character's carefully maintained composure and finds the fury that has been building underneath it. She is not simply Peter's long-suffering partner. She is a full person with a full set of frustrations and desires that the show usually keeps in the background because the plot does not require them, and when it does let them surface, the result is a more interesting character than the supportive wife register alone could produce. Meg Griffin, voiced by Mila Kunis since Season 2 following Lacey Chabert's departure, is the eldest Griffin child and one of the most emotionally coherent characters in the show's universe. What makes Meg coherent is simple. She wants what everyone wants. She wants to be seen. She wants her family to take her seriously. She wants friends who are genuine. She wants a version of high school that does not involve daily humiliation. These are not exotic desires. They are baseline human needs expressed through the vehicle of a teenage girl who has the misfortune of being the most ordinary person in an extraordinary household. In the first 3 seasons, Meg is the show's straight character in the purest sense, the one who exists in a recognizable emotional reality while everyone around her operates at a comic register. Her problems are teenage problems, social exclusion, parental inattention, romantic disappointment. They are relatable, not despite their mundanity, but because of it. In a show built on escalating absurdism, Meg's ordinary sadness is a different kind of effective. She has moments of genuine competence and quiet strength scattered through even the show's difficult middle seasons. The Simpsons crossover episode in Season 13, where she meets Lisa Simpson and discovers she has a talent for the saxophone, shows what Meg can be when the writers invest in her. The Peter's Sister episode in Season 14, which gives her emotional arc a genuine resolution through the discovery of Peter's own history with abuse and their subsequent reconciliation, is one of the more quietly moving half-hours the show has produced. These moments exist, and they matter, even if the show does not always protect them across episodes. Chris Griffin is the family's middle child in emotional, if not chronological terms. He sits between Meg's seriousness and Stewie's brilliance in a space that is warm and slightly confused. Seth Green voices him with a delivery that suggests someone who has never quite been able to keep up with conversations that moved on before he could formulate his contribution. Chris is not stupid, exactly. He is gentle and imaginative, and occasionally surprisingly perceptive about things that require observation rather than analysis. His drawings, which the show occasionally reveals to be more sophisticated and accomplished than you would expect, suggest an interior life that his verbal presentation does not always convey. He has a recurring relationship with a whispering voice in his closet that gives him advice, another of the show's many instances of surreal domestic horror that nobody in the house treats as particularly noteworthy. He has a crush on various girls that changes from season to season. He has a complicated relationship with the concept of his own intelligence, oscillating between genuine brightness and the performed helplessness of someone who has decided it is easier to let other people assume he cannot handle things. The Griffin family, when it is working at its best, operates as a unit where each member's specific strengths and specific blindnesses create a dynamic that is greater than the sum of its parts. Lois's practical intelligence and emotional literacy, Peter's boundless, directionless enthusiasm, Meg's emotional perception and frustrated competence, Chris's warmth and observational sensitivity, Stewie's terrifying brilliance, Brian's intelligence and inadequacy in approximately equal measure. Lay these personalities over each other and you get something that resembles, in its dysfunction and its love, something that feels genuinely like a family. Part 11. The music of Quahog Every Song, Every Barbershop Quartet. Family Guy, at its core, is a musical show. This is not a controversial statement if you have spent any real time with it, but it is one that often gets lost in discussions about the cutaways and the characters and the ongoing debates about the show's trajectory. The music is always there. Seth MacFarlane is an unabashed enthusiast for big band jazz, show tunes, and the entire musical landscape of the mid-20th century American entertainment industry, and that enthusiasm saturates the show in ways both obvious and subtle. MacFarlane has released multiple albums of jazz and big band standards as a recording artist. He performed at Carnegie Hall. His love of Frank Sinatra is not a joke or an affectation. It is a genuine aesthetic commitment that has shaped the show's relationship with music from its earliest episodes. The show's composers, Ron Jones and Walter Murphy, among others, produced scores that consistently reached beyond the standard animated comedy register into something with more swing and more craft, and the result is a show whose incidental music rewards attention in ways that most animated shows do not. Prom Night Dumpster Baby from the Season 5 episode Peter's Two Dads is one of the show's most immediately and lastingly iconic original songs. It is sung by a baby who was abandoned in a dumpster on prom night, backed up by other similarly disposed infants who swing their umbilical cords like canes in the style of a 1940s Rat Pack performance. The comedy of the piece is inseparable from its technical execution. It is a genuinely well-written song. The melody has the swing and momentum of actual show business. The lyrics are precise and dark. The production, within the show's animated context, treats the number with complete seriousness, which is exactly the right approach. If the show had played it cheap, the joke would not work. The joke works because the baby is selling it. You Have AIDS from Season 4's The Cleveland Loretta Quagmire is the other most cited original song. When Dr. Hartman cannot bring himself to deliver an AIDS diagnosis to a patient, he offloads the task to Peter, who has claimed expertise in delivering bad news. Peter then leads a barbershop quartet in a formally correct, richly harmonized, completely upbeat number informing the patient of his diagnosis. The song clarifies, mid-verse, that the patient does not merely have HIV, but full-blown AIDS. Several AIDS support organizations protested the scene. The song went on to become one of the most quoted pieces of television music of its decade. The Shipoopi number from the Season 4 episode Patriot Games is perhaps the best example of the show's musical ambition in its most extravagant register. Shipoopi is a real song from Meredith Willson's 1957 musical, The Music Man, and Peter's post-touchdown performance of it on a professional football field is staged with a scale that the show normally reserves for its most spectacular moments. The entire stadium participates. The show's full orchestral resources are deployed. It is directed with the commitment of an actual Broadway production number, and it runs for several minutes without apology. The Road to episodes provide the show's most sustained musical episodes. Road to Rhode Island gave Brian and Stewie their first full duet, a jazzy number on a train that established the register for everything that followed. Christmas Time is Killing Us from Road to the North Pole is the musical high point of the entire Road series, a escalating Christmas carol sung by increasingly desperate North Pole elves, nominated for both an Emmy and a Grammy. The melody draws from Be Prepared from The Lion King, and the lyrics trace the arc of Christmas as experienced from the supply chain end, the impossible expectations, the relentless schedule, the particular misery of people who cannot say no to the season's demands. It is funny, and it is also, for about 30 seconds in the middle, something closer to genuinely sad. The FCC song from PTV in Season 4 is one of the show's most overtly political songs, a full production number in which Peter argues against television censorship while being backed up by Stewie and Brian in elaborate costumes. The tune is based on Volunteer Fireman's Picnic from the stage musical Take Me Along, and the resulting number is one of those cases where the show's satirical ambition and its entertainment value operate at exactly the same frequency. Seth MacFarlane's genuine love for Frank Sinatra Jr. The son of Frank Sinatra resulted in Frank Jr.'s appearance in the Season 4 episode Brian Sings and Swings, where he and Brian perform together in a sequence that allows MacFarlane to indulge the full range of his musical obsessions. The episode is one of the show's quieter love letters to a specific era of American music, and the When We Swing number holds up as a piece of genuine entertainment independent of its context in the episode. My Drunken Irish Dad from Peter's Two Dads is a brisk vaudeville number performed by a stereotypical Irish musician character and deploying every available Irish-American musical cliché with cheerful enthusiasm. The fact that the show acknowledges the clichés it is deploying is not quite the same as transcending them, but the song's energy and commitment carry it past the point where that distinction matters very much. A Bag of Weed from the Season 7 episode 420 is a Brian and Stewie duet in the style of a Broadway showstopper, advocating for marijuana legalization with the production values of a fully staged musical number. The show's satirical point, wrapped in a genuinely catchy song, is delivered with enough theatrical conviction that the advocacy and the comedy coexist without canceling each other out. There are dozens of other songs across the show's run that deserve mention. This House is Freakin' Sweet from Peter Peter, Caviar Eater, where the Griffin family celebrates their inheritance of a mansion. It's a Wonderful Day for Pie from Road to the Multiverse, which functions as both a parody of Disney musical conventions and a genuine example of them. Mr. Booze from Friends of Peter G., a revival-style drinking song with perfect period specificity. Candy Quahog Marshmallow from a Season 14 episode, which parodies K-pop with enough choreographic specificity to demonstrate that the writers actually studied the genre rather than just gesturing at it. The music is the show's least discussed major achievement, and it rewards the kind of late-night, low-attention listening that this kind of video is designed for. Just let it play. You will hear something you forgot you knew by heart. You will hum along without meaning to. That is what happens when you live inside a musical world long enough. The songs get in you and stay there. Part 12. Death, God, and the Afterlife. The cosmic lore of Family Guy. Family Guy has a cosmology. It is not consistent, and it does not need to be. Consistency would rob it of the specific kind of comedy that its theological improvisation generates. But across more than 25 years of episodes, the show has accumulated enough theological lore to constitute a genuine alternative metaphysics, one in which God is real and somewhat overwhelmed by the administrative demands of his position. Death is an entity who injured himself chasing Peter Griffin and then had to convalesce at the Griffin house in a Providence College sweatsuit, and hell is a place where Satan bothers dogs with a vacuum cleaner. Death first appears in the Season 2 episode Death is a Bitch, voiced by Norm Macdonald. Peter, trying to avoid paying a hospital bill, writes deceased on his insurance form. Death shows up to collect him. Peter runs. Death gives chase, trips, and sprains his ankle. This is the inciting incident. Death has injured himself, and until he recovers, nobody in the world can die. The implications of this are explored with appropriate chaos. Peter tells the world about the situation. Humanity discovers it is temporarily immortal. People test the limits of this condition in creative and destructive ways. Death, meanwhile, is lying on the Griffin's couch, wearing borrowed athletic gear, playing a board game of Life with Lois in a moment of irony that the show acknowledges and then sets aside. He is rude about the television selections. He criticizes Lois's Coco. He has absolutely no gratitude for being hosted. Eventually, Peter takes over Death's duties, wearing the cloak and carrying the scythe, in an attempt to demonstrate that the rules of mortality still apply. The episode resolves with the natural order restored, and Death leaves with the Griffin's fruit cup, but not, notably, with Peter's life. Norm Macdonald was unavailable for subsequent episodes due to other commitments, and the role was recast with Adam Carolla, who voiced the character in most of its later appearances. Death in Family Guy is characterized less as a force of nature and more as an entity who is somewhat ill-suited to his job, though committed to it. He has girl trouble. He finds social situations awkward. He makes inappropriate requests in exchange for favors, though. When Lois interprets one such request as a sexual proposition and begins to unbutton her blouse, Death quickly clarifies that he was asking for more fruit from the refrigerator. He thought it was a good try, but that was not what he meant. In Death Lives, Peter helps Death pursue a romantic interest, a woman named Amy who works in a pet store. The date does not go well. Amy's views on animals, which she expresses at length over coffee, are revealed to be thoroughly irritating to Death, who eventually resolves the situation in the only way available to him. His social life across all his appearances suggests an entity who has been doing one very specific job for an extremely long time and has not developed much in the way of social skills from the experience. Death has a brother, and then he dies. When Death himself dies in a later episode written in honor of Norm Macdonald, who passed away in 2021, the show creates the concept of a super death to handle the transition. The mythology stacks on itself. God appears in several episodes and is characterized as somewhat harried and not entirely on top of things. He is not malevolent. He is perhaps best described as overburdened. In 3 Acts of God, Death takes Peter and the friends to see God in heaven to ask why he keeps causing the New England Patriots to lose games. Heaven, it turns out, is structured like a sandals resort, and God is managing it with the frantic efficiency of someone who never quite gets enough staff. He has strong opinions about certain things and very little patience for follow-up questions. In You There, God? It's me, Peter. Peter ends up in an elevator with God, a cosmic administrative space in which God is weighing whether to send Peter to heaven or hell. The scene is quietly effective. God catalogs Peter's failures as a husband and father with a precision that suggests he has been paying attention and he is not particularly impressed. Peter's response to being measured against his own potential and found wanting is, characteristically, to argue the point. Heaven in Family Guy's cosmology is a real place, accessible after death, and populated by people who manage to be genuinely good enough to qualify. The qualification standards, it is suggested in several episodes, are higher than most people assume. John Hughes, the filmmaker, is revealed in a cutaway to be in hell rather than heaven, which catches the specific comedic register of hell in this universe. Not a place of dramatic torment, but a place where people who were not quite good enough end up discovering they should have tried harder. Brian, in a sequence from the Stewie Griffin, the Untold Story direct-to-video film, appears in heaven in a fantasy sequence drinking with Ernest Hemingway, Vincent van Gogh, and Kurt Cobain. It is perhaps the most aspirational portrait of the afterlife that the show produces, and the company is consistent with what you would expect Brian to consider the ideal eternal companion list. Satan appears periodically, usually in hell, and the show's version of hell is less about fire and torment, and more about specific, customized punishments. Satan scares dogs with a vacuum cleaner. The show's hell has a bureaucratic quality. It is somewhere that you end up through administrative process, and its torments are personal and specifically calibrated to what would bother each individual most. There is also a super devil, introduced in the Boys Do Cry episode, who is apparently a step up from Satan in the cosmic hierarchy. What the super devil's specific administrative responsibilities are is not elaborated. Jesus Christ appears in Family Guy in a recurring capacity as a figure who is present in modern Rhode Island and trying to navigate the social world of Quahog with varying success. He drives a car, he attends events, he has a cell phone. The show handles these appearances with the specific kind of affectionate irreverence that characterizes its approach to most sacred things, not hostile, not nihilistic, but resolutely unwilling to extend any special deference. The show's cosmological world operates best when it commits to its own internal logic. When death is injured and nobody can die, the rules of that situation are followed through to their logical conclusion. When Peter ends up in an elevator with God, the conversation follows the emotional logic of what it would actually mean to be examined by an omniscient entity who has been paying attention. The show does not need its theology to be consistent across episodes. It needs it to be internally coherent within each episode, and when it achieves that coherence, the results are some of the most imaginatively strange and quietly effective material the show has produced. There is something deeply comforting about a cosmology that acknowledges the big questions and then answers them with a Providence College sweatsuit. The universe is uncertain, but death is recovering from his ankle. The afterlife is real, but the admission standards are confusing. God exists, and he is doing his best in difficult administrative circumstances. This is not meaninglessness. This is something more like the particular kind of hope that comes from knowing that, even at the cosmic level, nobody really has everything figured out. Part 13. The Mythology. Nobody discusses Stewie's technology and the fabric of time. Most discussions of Family Guy stop at the characters and the jokes and the cutaways. But there is a layer of mythology inside the show that never quite gets the sustained attention it deserves, and it lives almost entirely in Stewie Griffin's bedroom. Stewie has built things that should not be possible, and the show treats them as furniture background details, plot devices, conveniences rather than as the extraordinary accomplishments they represent. The Time Machine alone should have rewritten the course of human history several times over. The fact that it has not, that history keeps reasserting itself in roughly the shape it was already in, is one of those narrative conveniences that the show relies on without explaining. And the explanation it occasionally gestures at is something close to the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. Changes in one timeline branch into a new timeline rather than overwriting the original. The Time Machine's first major appearance as a plot device occurs in Road to Germany, when Mort Goldman steps into it by accident and ends up in 1939 Poland. Brian and Stewie follow him, and what ensues is essentially a World War II adventure that tests the boundaries of what the Time Machine can and cannot do, and what it costs in terms of materials and fuel to operate. The episode establishes that the machine requires a specific chemical fuel to return the user to their origin point, that this fuel is historically available but hard to obtain, and that traveling back in time while a war is ongoing is significantly more complicated than traveling back in time during peaceful conditions. The Time Machine also figures prominently in Back to the Pilot from Season 10, where Brian and Stewie travel back to the show's first episode and observe themselves the past versions of themselves going through the motions of the premiere. The episode is formally interesting because it creates a closed loop that the show acknowledges directly. By traveling back to the pilot, they become part of the pilot's events, which means the pilot now includes the intervention of future Brian and Stewie, which means the timeline they came from is not identical to the timeline they return to. The show plays this for comedy rather than resolving the logical complications, which is the correct choice. The multiverse remote from Road to the Multiverse is a different technology with a different operating principle. Rather than moving through time, it moves laterally through probability, accessing parallel versions of reality in which specific historical decisions went differently. Specific evolutionary paths diverged. Specific physical laws operate at different parameters. The universes Brian and Stewie visit across that episode each have their own internal consistency. The technologically advanced universe works according to recognizable physics, just accelerated. The dog-ruled universe has its own sociology. The Disney universe has its own physics of cheerfulness. There is an entire catalog of Stewie's other inventions that gets less systematic attention. The mind control helmet, which has appeared in several episodes and functions with varying reliability. The weather control device, which shows up in early seasons as part of his world domination toolkit. The shrink ray. The freeze ray. The teleportation device, which, by Rhodes to Vegas, is sophisticated enough to duplicate its users rather than merely translocating them. The cloning machine, which, in The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair, produces an evil duplicate of Stewie that may or may not have replaced the original. The question of whether the Stewie currently inhabiting the Griffin house in recent seasons is the original Stewie or the evil clone from that episode is one of the show's genuinely unresolved canonical puzzles. The episode ends with the character looking at the camera with glowing yellow eyes, an image that suggests the clone won the encounter and Brian unknowingly killed the original. This is never addressed in subsequent episodes. The show either forgot it happened or decided it was more interesting as an unresolved uncertainty than as a confirmed plot development. There is also the matter of Stewie's aging. He has been 1 year old for more than 25 years of real time, and for what the show's internal timeline would have to stretch across at least a decade of fictional events. The show is not interested in resolving this. Stewie himself occasionally acknowledges it, and his acknowledgement functions as part of the comedy rather than as any kind of sincere attempt to address the question. He is permanently one. The technology in his bedroom keeps evolving. Both things are true simultaneously, and the show simply asks you to hold them together without looking for the seam. The deeper the mythology goes, the more it starts to suggest that Stewie's bedroom is not merely a domestic space, but something closer to a laboratory at the edge of what physics currently permits, staffed by one very motivated baby with essentially unlimited inventive capacity and no institutional oversight. If anyone in this household ever took the time to sit down and catalog everything Stewie has built, the resulting document would look like the most advanced classified research program ever conducted by any government, anywhere, in history. But Peter needs the TV remote, and Lois is calling him for dinner. And so the bedroom stays closed, and the inventions stay inside it, and the world continues on as though none of it is happening. Part 14. Herbert, Quahog's strangest residence, and the supporting cosmos. One of the quietest ongoing achievements of Family Guy across its long run is the slow accumulation of a supporting cast that gives Quahog a texture and density that no single character or storyline could provide alone. Herbert is an elderly man who lives in the neighborhood and whose manner of speaking slow, wheezing, directed at teenage boys with a persistence that the show never quite makes explicit but always makes unmistakable, makes him one of the most tonally difficult recurring characters in the show's history. Mike Henry voices him with a vocal delivery that functions like ambient comedy. You hear Herbert speak, and the discomfort of knowing what he is suggesting, while the show technically never says it outright, is the mechanism of the joke. His relationship with Chris, whom he watches with dedicated attention across multiple seasons, is one of those dynamics that the show deploys for consistent unease without ever resolving. Herbert's unrequited feelings are never addressed directly. He simply recurs, wheezing, in the background of Quahog's social world. The show's news anchors, Tom Tucker and Diane Simmons, are a pair whose on-screen chemistry suggests a professional relationship built entirely on mutual contempt, held in place by the necessity of sharing a camera frame. Tom Tucker has a son, Jake, whose face is inexplicably upside down, a running visual gag that the show treats with the same complete solemnity it treats everything else, which is to say, absolutely none. Diane Simmons has a genuine arc across the show's run that culminates in a Season 9 episode where the mystery of her behavior generates more genuine suspense than Family Guy usually attempts. Mort Goldman's pharmacy sits somewhere in Quahog's commercial district, and Mort himself moves through the show as a figure of consistent, low-level misfortune, the kind of person for whom things going wrong is not a surprise, but rather a baseline expectation. His son Neil's crush on Meg is one of the show's long-running gentle background elements, a character-driven running gag that generates its comedy from the absolute certainty of its unrequited nature, and Neil's complete refusal to acknowledge this certainty. Mayor Adam West occupies a specific place in Quahog's civic landscape that only exists because the real Adam West was willing to play a surreal version of himself for over a decade with unfailing comedic commitment. The fictional Mayor West is a man whose decision-making process appears to involve no recognizable logical framework. He responds to civic problems with solutions that are adjacent to the problems in purely thematic, rather than practical terms. When he is presented with a real crisis, he approaches it with complete sincerity and absolutely no appropriate expertise, and the results are consistently improbable. His death, written into the show after the real Adam West passed away in 2017, was handled with enough warmth that it functioned as both a plot development and a genuine tribute. Dr. Hartman recurs whenever medical situations arise, which in a show built on physical comedy and escalating disasters is quite frequently. He is not a particularly competent physician, though the show treats his incompetence as a personality quirk rather than a professional liability. He delivers diagnoses with a specific awkward quality, suggests treatments that are inappropriate, and manages to survive encounters with Peter Griffin that would have resulted in significant litigation in any realistic medical practice. Consuela, the housekeeper, appears periodically in the Griffin house and various other Quahog locations, characterized primarily by her insistence on cleaning regardless of context and her repeated requests for more lemon pledge. She is voiced by Mike Henry and exists as a recurring gag about the particular culture clash of a housekeeper who has internalized the importance of a very specific cleaning product to a degree that transcends practical necessity. The Drunken Clams regulars beyond the main four are sketched in just enough detail to give the bar the sense of a lived-in space. Seamus, the sailor with prosthetic wooden limbs who is treated with deadpan normality by everyone around him, appears at the bar with enough consistency to qualify as a fixture. Various other Quahog residents cycle through the background of episodes, recognized through visual shorthand rather than name, contributing to the sense that the city has a population beyond its principal characters. The Griffin house itself has internal geography that shifts depending on the episode's needs, but its emotional geography is consistent. The living room is where the family assembles, where the television rules, where Peter and the world have most of their collisions. The kitchen is Lois's domain and the domestic center. Stewie's bedroom is the impossible space. Meg and Chris's rooms are the spaces the show visits when it wants to remind you that this is, underneath everything, a story about a family. Quahog's geography is flexible in the way that all animated sitcom geographies are flexible. The Drunken Clam is walking distance when the plot needs it to be, and a short drive when a different pacing is required. But the emotional consistency of the place, the sense that these characters know where they are and what that means, is maintained across the show's run with enough care that the city feels real in the way fictional places feel real, as a space inside your own experience of it rather than as a location with physical coordinates. Part 15. The episodes that stayed moments that built the canon. Some episodes do not just get watched, they get held onto. They become the reference points for everything else the show does, the high watermarks that fans return to when they want to demonstrate what the show was capable of at its best, the moments that get described at dinner tables to friends who have never watched the show and who somehow, through the description alone, become curious. Road to Rhode Island is the first of these for a lot of people, but perhaps the most surprising, genuinely great episode is Brian and Stewie from Season 8. An entire half hour, 2 characters, a bank vault, no cutaways. The premise is so stripped of everything the show normally relies on that it sounds like a dare rather than a production decision. What happens if you remove all the machinery and just leave the 2 best characters alone? Together? The answer is one of the most structurally unusual and emotionally honest half hours in the show's run. Brian reveals that he keeps a gun in a safety deposit box because he has thought about using it on himself. Stewie reveals the depth of what Brian means to him, the particularity of his love for this specific dog, in language that is more tender and more precise than any other moment the show produces before or since. They eat pâté. They drink from a bottle Brian finds. They talk, and the talking is enough. Da Boom from Season 2 is the first episode to bring the show's apocalyptic instincts to full expression. The year 2000 approaches and the Griffins, convinced that Y2K will end civilization, hole up in the house. When the world does in fact end in a nuclear holocaust, the family has to make their way across a devastated Rhode Island landscape in search of a surviving Twinkie factory. The episode is a parody of every post-apocalyptic road movie and television special that was produced in the late 1990s, in anticipation of an event that turned out to be nothing, and it runs with the premise to a degree of commitment that the show rarely sustains for a full episode. The mutant characters they encounter along the way are drawn with the enthusiastic grotesquerie of a show that knows exactly what register it is operating in and is delighted to be there. And then there were fewer. From Season 9 is Family Guy doing an Agatha Christie murder mystery in a bottle format, with nearly every recurring character in the show assembled at a remote mansion for a dinner party that rapidly becomes a whodunit. The episode is over an hour long, plays its genre completely straight in terms of plot structure, and has enough genuine surprise in its reveals that it rewards the attention of anyone who takes the mystery seriously rather than waiting for the next cutaway. It also has the distinction of killing off Diane Simmons in a manner that the show treats as a genuine dramatic death rather than a comedy beat, which lands with more weight than you might expect given that Diane Simmons is, by any measure, a supporting character from the Quahog news desk. Stewie Kills Lois and its follow-up, Lois Kills Stewie, the Season 6 two-parter, are the episodes that most fully honor the original premise of Stewie Griffin. Stewie finally does what he has been threatening to do since the pilot episode. He kills Lois, the world keeps going, he takes over the world, he becomes the dictator. The second episode is his moment of complete victory, and then the entire thing is revealed to be a simulation running on his computer. The twist is simultaneously a clever piece of structural self-awareness and a melancholy acknowledgement that the show was not going to commit to the consequences of its own greatest character premise. The two-parter is great. The twist is honest about what the show was and what it was not willing to be. Peter's Daughter from Season 6 is another episode that the show's defenders cite when they want to demonstrate its capacity for genuine dramatic stakes alongside comedy. Meg nearly drowns and falls into a coma, and Peter, convinced that he has been a terrible father, resolves to be better only for the recovery and everything that follows to complicate and ultimately undercut his good intentions in ways that are more emotionally nuanced than the show typically allows. It does not resolve cleanly. It does not end with a hug and a lesson fully absorbed. It ends with something closer to the truth of how people actually fail the commitments they make to each other. Petarded from Season 4 is the episode where Peter takes an IQ test and discovers that he qualifies as mentally retarded by clinical measure. The episode then follows what happens when Peter deploys this diagnosis as a social shield, using it to escape consequences for behavior that the show usually treats as simply Peter being Peter, now reframed as behavior that a protected class cannot be held accountable for. The episode is the kind of thing that would be very difficult to produce on contemporary network television, and whether that difficulty reflects a genuine ethical improvement in how the culture handles intellectual disability or simply a different relationship with comedic risk is a question worth sitting with. Wasted Talent from Season 2 is the episode where Peter discovers he has an extraordinary talent for playing piano, a talent that surfaces only when he is drunk. The episode is a parody of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory that uses the Chocolate Factory template to explore what happens when someone's greatest skill is inseparable from a behavior that everyone around them wants to eliminate. Peter is transformed by the talent. Lois, who has spent years trying to teach Peter to play piano, is confronted by the fact that the version of Peter who can play beautifully is not a version she can have at any moment she chooses. It is one of the episodes where the show's comedy and its emotional subtext achieve an unusual and productive alignment. The Thin White Line and Brian Does Hollywood from Season 3 form a two-parter that gives Brian one of his most ambitious storylines. Brian becomes a drug-sniffing dog for the police department and develops a cocaine addiction. He then goes to Hollywood to pursue his entertainment career, ends up involved in the adult film industry in a capacity that the show handles with characteristic willingness to go there, and eventually hits bottom in a way that allows him to examine why he makes the choices he makes. It is more character-driven than most of the show's plots, and it lands the landing rather than undercutting it. These episodes are not the only ones. There are others in every season that demonstrate the show's range and its capacity for something beyond its default register. What unites them is a quality of commitment to the premise, to the characters, to the specific emotional reality of whatever situation the episode is exploring. When Family Guy commits, it can do things that very few animated shows attempt, and fewer still successfully complete. The episodes you remember are the ones where something was actually at stake, even if the stakes were absurd ones. Stewie getting his bear back, Brian finding his mother, the baby killing the man who was going to kill Santa, in a sequence that is both funny and strangely heroic. Peter, standing in front of his family with a realization he cannot quite articulate, doing the best version of the apology his limited emotional vocabulary allows. These are the episodes. These are the moments. And they are still there, in the catalog, waiting to be watched again. Part 16. the legacy what Family Guy actually did to television. When Family Guy premiered in 1999, it was received by critics with the particular kind of skeptical warmth that gets extended to things that are clearly capable of more than they are currently doing. The comparison to The Simpsons was immediate and unfavorable, or rather, The Simpsons comparison was used as a template against which Family Guy was measured and found to be louder, less sophisticated, more willing to sacrifice narrative coherence for a joke. The Entertainment Weekly review described it as The Simpsons as conceived by a singularly sophomoric mind. 25 years later, that review still gets quoted, and it gets quoted precisely because it was not entirely wrong and was also not entirely right, which is the condition of most interesting critical judgments about comedy. Family Guy was less sophisticated than The Simpsons in some specific ways that matter to critics. It was also doing something that The Simpsons was not doing and could not do, operating in a register of rapid-fire cultural reference and deliberate tonal instability that created a different kind of comedy experience. Whether that different kind of comedy experience was better or worse is a question that time has mostly declined to answer definitively. What Family Guy unambiguously did was establish the viability of a particular type of animated comedy that has shaped everything that came after it. The cutaway gag format, the willingness to sacrifice narrative coherence for a single great joke, the deployment of shock as a comedic tool alongside wit. These were not entirely new in 1999, but Family Guy systematized them and made them central rather than peripheral, and in doing so, it changed the grammar of animated comedy in ways that every subsequent show working in that space has had to either adopt or consciously reject. The Adult Swim revival story, the canceled show brought back by unexpected streaming era before streaming existed viewership through cable reruns and DVD sales, is now a template that the industry studies because it happened and nothing quite like it had happened before. Family Guy did not just come back from cancellation. It came back from cancellation in a way that demonstrated that audience loyalty, in the right medium, could outlast a network's institutional memory and eventually force a reversal of a business decision that had seemed final. The show proved something about how audiences relate to content they love that the industry took seriously. The show is also responsible, in complex and sometimes uncomfortable ways, for the cultural prevalence of a particular kind of comedy that relies on the audience's ability to hold two things simultaneously: the content being referenced and the awareness that referencing it is a choice being made by specific people with specific intentions. This is irony as a comedy structure, and Family Guy deployed it more systematically than almost any television show before it. Whether that deployment made the culture better or worse at processing irony is a genuine question with no clean answer. What Seth MacFarlane did with Family Guy, in the specific cultural moment of 1999 and in the years that followed, was demonstrate that a post-Simpsons American animated comedy did not have to be about the steady accumulation of character depth and social observation. It could be about the speed of association, the pleasure of unexpected connection, the comedy of the gap between what something looks like and what it is. The Simpsons built Springfield from the outside in, layering detail and character and history over decades until the town felt like a real place with a real past. Family Guy built Quahog from the inside out, starting with the characters and their specific energies and letting the world accumulate around them. Both approaches work. They work differently, and the different things they produce satisfy different needs, and the audience that loves both is large enough that the comparison ultimately says more about critics' preferences than about either show's fundamental value. The show was nominated for a Primetime Emmy for Outstanding Comedy Series in 2009, the first animated show to receive that nomination since The Flintstones in 1961. That nomination matters not because awards validate quality, but because it represents a moment of institutional acknowledgement that the show was operating at a level that the broader comedy landscape was willing to recognize as significant. It is harder to dismiss something that its peers have taken seriously, and the nomination made dismissal harder. By 2025, with a renewal deal taking the show through its 30th anniversary season, Family Guy occupies a peculiar position in the television landscape. A show that a fraction of its original audience watches in new episodes, a show that a much larger audience continues to encounter through streaming and reruns and clips shared on social media, A show that has outlasted the network conditions that created it, and the critical consensus about what it represents, and even the full creative involvement of the person who made it. It persists because it became part of the fabric, because the Griffins and their house on Spooner Street and their dysfunctional warmth and their specific brand of chaos became part of how a generation of viewers understands what television can be. That is its legacy, not the Emmy nominations, or the ratings records, or the resurrection story. The legacy is that Stewie Griffin, sitting in his high chair in 1999, speaking in the voice of Rex Harrison, plotting the death of his mother and the subjugation of humanity, that image entered the culture and stayed. It is in there now. It is part of the shared vocabulary. You can reference it and be understood. You can describe the voice and someone will hear it. You can mention the name Quahog and someone will know where you mean. That is what a show does when it lasts. It becomes a place you can go back to. It becomes a reference that requires no explanation. It becomes, quietly and without ceremony, part of the landscape of the imagination. And on nights like this one, when you need something to accompany the specific quiet of late night, that place is there. Part 15. Sleeping in Quahog, Why We Come Back. It is late now, or early, depending on where you are and what your particular relationship with this hour of the day happens to be. You have been in Quahog for a while. You have been in Stewie's bedroom and in the Drunken Clam and in the space where Peter and Lois are arguing about something that will be resolved before the credits roll. You have been in the middle of a chicken fight and on a train with Brian and Stewie, somewhere between Palm Springs and Rhode Island, listening to them perform a jazz number about the journey they are taking. You have been in the North Pole when Christmas was slowly destroying Santa, and in 1939 Poland with Mort Goldman, and in the Disney universe where everything is a song and the pie is wonderful. This is what Family Guy does when it is working. It gives you a world that is ridiculous and warm and occasionally sad in ways that the comedy never quite cancels out. It gives you characters who are flawed enough to be real and funny enough to be bearable and loved enough by each other, by the audience, to make their failures matter. It gives you a town that feels like a town and a family that feels, in its specific dysfunctional way, like a family. The show started with a young man from Connecticut drawing cartoons in an art school, trying to put Rex Harrison inside a baby, trying to give a talking dog the particular quality of someone who is always slightly disappointed in the company he is keeping. It started in 1999 and it has been going in one form or another ever since. More than 25 years. More than 400 episodes. More cutaways than anyone has counted. More songs than anyone has fully cataloged. More chicken fights than anyone needed, and somehow never quite enough. The thing about any place you love is that you can go back to it. You can be in it just by closing your eyes and letting the sounds of it come to you. The Drunken Clam is there. The baby with the ray gun is in his crib, planning something impossible. The dog is in the car, listening to NPR. The chicken is around a corner somewhere, waiting. Go to sleep. You are in Quahog. You are with the Griffins. Everyone is exactly where they have always been. Everything is fine. If you stayed with me all the way to this point, you are the kind of person this channel is made for. Drop a comment below. Tell me your favorite Family Guy moment, the one that lives in your memory and comes back without warning. Tell me where you are. Tell me what time it is. Tell me if you are actually asleep and just dreaming of Griffin family chaos. Hit the subscribe button if you have not already. It is free, it takes 2 seconds, and it means that the next time I spend 4 hours making this kind of video, you will actually know it exists. There are more videos like this coming, more worlds to fall asleep inside, more lore to narrate in the dark, more things to keep you company when the night is quiet, and you just need a voice in the room. Sleep well, good night from Quahog.